Well, I'm packing again for another lecture, and I want to make sure I have some rubber legs. These crazy things. I remember back when I first started tying flies, the only fly that used rubber legs was a girdle bug. But boy, times have changed. Now we have dry flies, all kinds of ones. And if you had a chance to look at our book, you can tell that there's a lot of patterns that use rubber legs. One of the most popular dry flies here in Jackson Hole, it's kind of been a popular fly throughout the West, is a fly called the Turcks tarantula. It was designed by a Jackson Hole guide by the name of Guy Turck. And it has become a staple here in Jackson Hole. It won the Jackson Hole 1 fly a number of years back when George Anderson took it to victory. Guy has guided in the 1 fly and been a part of Jackson Hole for a number of years. I think you'll enjoy my friend, Guy Turck, and he ties the Turcks tarantula.
All right, thanks, Jack. I'm going to show you folks how to tie my Turk tarantula today. And starting with the hook, I like to use a Dyricke 710. I'm going to tie a size 8 here today. Any 2X long shank or 3X long shank hook will do, though. The fly will support a pretty good heavy wire hook, so you don't have to use a light wire hook. And when I thread the head area, I like to completely cover the shank with thread till I get about halfway down the hook shank. And then I just get back to the tail area, do 4 turns, and get ready to tie on the tail. For the tail, I'm usually going to use a Amherst pheasant tippets, though you can use golden pheasant tippets. It just depends on what colors you're looking for. And make that tail about one gap length. Lash it in there real good. And next we're going to dub the body. I'm going to use blended hares mask for this one, although you can use, this is a fly that you can really vary the colors on. If you want to make it look like a grasshopper, you can put yellow bodies on it, or I also tie them in red, or sometimes green works well. But this hare's mask seems to work as good as anything, so we'll just do a hare's mask. This imitates a lot of different types of stone flies that hatch around the country. And you're going to cover about the back 2/3 of the shank of the hook with dubbing. And the way I like to do this is tapering the body from the back towards the front. In other words, skinny towards the back, and then as you work your way towards the head of the fly, you just start making it fatter and fatter. And eventually what you're going to want is a pretty robust sized body on this. And it takes a while to dub a size 8 hook. I originally thought of this pattern because I'd been fishing Madam X's with my clients, and I noticed the fly was working awfully good, but sometimes it didn't float so good, and sometimes it was hard to see. So I just kept the rubber legs, and I added the calf tail wing for visibility and the spun clipped head so it would float a little better. And when it was all said and done, it seemed to work pretty well. If you've ever looked at the body of a stonefly or a grasshopper, I'm sure you've noticed that they're pretty darn fat. And that's one of the reasons I like to make the body of this fly so fat. Because from the fish's point of view, it's going to give a pretty realistic silhouette. Okay, that's pretty good right there. Finish by putting a couple winds of thread right in front of the dubbed body. Next thing we're going to do is put the calf tail wing on. Now, on the wing, what I like to use is the bottom half of the calf tail. Once you get up to about halfway up, the butts of these hairs just get too thick and it starts to become a real problem in the tie-in area. It gets too bulky. So I like to use the bottom. That's your prime calf tail down here. And contrary to rumors, you can stack calf tail if you want to, if you want your fly to look neater. Probably works a little better if you don't. Give it a little, make it a little scraggly looking. But let's just say you're going to stack it. We'll pick out the long hairs first. And I use a toothbrush to comb out the under fur, like that. And if you do that, if you pull the long hairs out and then comb out the under fur, it'll stack up real nice. It can actually make it look quite even. Now the length of this wing is going to, you want the tip of the wing to come to the back of the tail of the fly, like so. Okay? Now I've got it measured there, and I'm going to switch hands, keeping my thumb in the same place, and I'm going to cut this at an angle. I'm not going to come straight up the calf tail wing. I'm going to cut it at an angle like so. And again, this is the main reason I do this is to reduce the bulk at the tie-in area. Otherwise, it just gets too unwieldy. Couple loose wraps, then cinch it, and then using constant tension, wind over the entire calf tail area. And if it gets a little bulky, you can always, this is an option to just do a little trimming to reduce bulk. And again, just completely cover the butts of the calf tail with thread. And you're going to leave the thread at the base of the wing there. Next, put some crystal flash on top of that wing. I like to use just 2 strands, one on either side of the fly, like so. You don't want to put too much crystal flash on. A little on each side. Wind over that and trim it off. And I'm going to make the crystal flash the length of the wing. I think that crystal flash helps out if you, this is a fly you can definitely pull underwater, drag it around, even dead drift it as a nymph. And I think once it gets pulled underwater, that's where that crystal flash starts to make a difference. Okay, now we're going to tie on a collar. Most people who look at this fly think the head and the collar are one piece of hair, but they're not. I tie them in separately. And you have to use good quality deer hair for this collar. You want deer hair that has as short a tip as you can find. You want that hair to be hollow all the way through the length of the deer hair up to the tip. Pick out the long parts, brush out the underfur with your toothbrush. And again, you don't have to stack it, but if you do, it'll look a little neater. If you don't, it'll look a little raggedy, which the fish probably prefer, actually. I'm going to measure it. You want the length of the collar to go about to the point of the hook, or maybe a little farther. So I'm going to measure it, I'm going to switch hands, and when I trim it, I'm going to leave just about a 1/16 of an inch of an area where I'm going to tie in with the thread. Because you're just going to pinch down the tips of these hairs, like so. 2 loose wraps, and then cinch it down, and it should flare up like so and be about 180 degrees around the shank of the hook. So that's about right, just like that. And you do not want to wrap over these butt ends. What you've done is tied an elk hair caddis wing on top of the fly, basically. And you don't want to wrap over those butt sections, because if you do, the collar hairs are going to have a tendency to pull out easier. And this, if you do it this way, it'll be much more durable. Next, we do the legs. And I like to put the legs on either side of my index finger like this and slide them over the hook like this. Start with 2 loose wraps. At this point, position the legs approximately where you want them. Then move your fingers right over the tie-in area and pinch, and then cinch with the bobbin like so. And then your legs will be right where you wanted them. Cinch it down, and then give it about 4 more wraps. Now the legs are tied in pretty good. Now's the time to adjust them. You don't want the legs sticking up in the air. You want them flat to the water, or perhaps angling slightly down into the water. Ideally, the legs should sit right in the surface film. Okay, you've tied on the legs. Now just move the thread immediately in front of the butt sections of the collar. Put a couple turns on it and just leave the thread right there, because when you tie the head on, you're going to want to get your hair tied in as far back on the head as you possibly can. So now for the head. Again, the type of hair you use is all important. I like to use the section of the deer, if you can get it, which is towards the rump section. I brought a piece in here. This white part's the rump part of the deer, and I'm going to use the gray part right next to it. This is the hollowest hair on the deer, and it's the easiest to spin, and it's very hollow, and it'll float extremely well. And this is the head is what does most of the flotation work on this fly, so you want to make sure you do a good job on it. Now I'm going to trim the tips off the hair like so. That just makes this whole thing a lot easier to work with. Now, on this particular hook, since it's not a straight eye, the eye is actually cocked downward. I'm going to come up with the hairs at the same angle as the eye of the hook. If it was straight eye hook, I would come straight in like this. But since it's a down eye, I'm going to come at an angle and stuff it on right there and push it as far back as you can. Regrasp, do 2 loose wraps, and cinch it down. It should flare out just like that. At this point, I'm going to wind the thread forward through the hairs, keeping the thread perpendicular to the shank of the hook. And about 3 to 4 wraps forward is all you need, because you're going to do this head in 2 stages. Now you stroke back the hairs and wind a couple wraps right in front, and that'll just keep everything in place so it doesn't slide forward on the hook. The head's done in 2 stages. That's the back half. We do the same thing one more time. I'm taking a clump of hair that's, when I'm done prepping it, it's approximately the diameter of a pencil, thereabouts. You don't want to use too big a clump of hair, and you don't want to use too little. About that much. Again, I'm going to come up at an angle, shove it as far back in there as you can. If you drop a few hairs at this point, it's no big deal. 2 loose wraps, and cinch it. Now on the front half, I may go back a turn or 2 and then come forward again. Stroke back the hairs, put a couple turns right in front like so. Now you're ready to whip finish the fly. And since I don't use lacquer on the heads of my flies, I'll usually double up on a whip finish. Do it twice, because I don't like to use lacquer. Okay. Now all that's left to do is trim the head and the rubber legs. Now to trim the head of this fly, you've got to pull the rubber legs back out of the way. And I didn't mention, but when I tie in the rubber legs, I leave them long on purpose because that makes them easier to grasp when it comes time to trim the head. So I'm going to hold the rubber legs back and pinch. I'm pinching right at the back of the shank of the hook. And they're safely tucked out of the way. And as long as you get a good grip, you won't cut the legs off. Now my first cut is perfectly flat across the bottom, like so. I'm going to blow the hairs out of the way as I do this. Next I'm going to trim the sides. And then I'm going to trim the top of the head, and I'm going to bevel this head. It's the skinniest here, and as you go towards the back of towards the collar, the head gets bigger. And now I'm just going to go around and finish trimming the stray hairs. And you notice that's the first time I've regrasped the hairs. I only have to switch once. Regrasp the rubber legs, I should say. And that's about it. Now, you want to get these rubber legs to sit, these front ones to push forward, so I just pull them forward like so. And sometimes you'll have to trim a little hair out of the way so that the legs will point in the towards the front of the fly like you want them. Okay, now the length of the rubber legs, that's open to debate. Some people like them short, some people like them long. I like them kind of long. So I'm going to make them a little longer than the back of the tail, about 1/4 inch. I like to make the front legs a little shorter than the back legs. Just kind of looks a little more realistic to me. And that's about it. And now there's your finished fly. If you put a drop of lacquer on the head, it'll be much more durable. And that's the finished tarantula.